Hello everyone. Global news for the day. US Ukraine peace talks progressing. The United States says ongoing talks with Ukraine and European partners aimed at ending the war with Russia has been constructive and productive. Negotiators met in Florida to coordinate strategy, security, support, and long term recovery plans for Ukraine, although Moscow has downplayed the chance of trilateral negotiations. The European Union also pledged 90 billion euros to support Ukraine's military and economic needs. Continued diplomatic engagement suggests pressure for a negotiated solution in one of the biggest global conflicts of the decade. The United States has teamed up with Mexico, the UK, Italy, France, and Croatia to launch a new global tourism initiative focused on sustainability, wellness, travel, and big international events to boost tourism revenue. Tourism is a major economic driver globally. Partnerships like this can reshape travel trends and post pandemic economic revival. The United Kingdom announced 40% cut in overseas aid allocated to counter threats and disinformation from Russia in the Western Balkans, reducing funds from 40 million pounds to 24 million pounds. Critics warn this could weaken support for democratic institutions in the region. Aid policy shifts affect geopolitical stability and balance of influence in strategically sensitive regions. In global security news linked to international affairs, the Bondi Beach terror attack in Sydney continues to be a major story with ongoing reports on motives, investigations, and community impact after the tragedy. Terrorism and public safety issues often influence international cooperation, security policy, and diplomatic relations. While not geopolitical, cultural unity and heritage events like thousands gathering at Stonehenge for the winter solstice show how global interest in culture spans nations and traditions. Cultural events can strengthen global community bonds and showcase peaceful cross border participation in shared human experiences. Canada and the United States are set to begin formal talks in mid January 2026 to review the USMCA free trade agreement ahead of its review deadline. Officials from both countries, led by Canada's Dominic LeBlanc, will address issues such as tariffs on steel, aluminium, lumber, dairy, and digital services amid ongoing economic tensions. The review comes after past negotiations earlier this year and concerns over trade barriers. USMCA United States Mexico Canada Agreement is a cornerstone of North American trade, accounting for deep economic integration between three nations. Any shift or dispute in this deal can ripple through industry, jobs, and export markets across the region. Canada reported its annual inflation rate for November 2025 remained nearly steady at 2.2%, with rising food costs partially offset by lower gasoline and shelter prices. Statistics Canada released the data showing inflation pressures persist but are not accelerating. Inflation at this level is closely watched by central banks. Steady prices affect interest rates expectations, consumer purchasing power, and fiscal policy stability, both in Canada and in cross border investment dynamics. In environmental and conservation news, a new 3,300 acre sanctuary has opened along the Texas Gulf Coast aimed at protecting the endangered whooping crane, one of the North America's rarest bird species. The initiative, supported by conservation power partners, offers crucial winter habitat and educational outreach. Conservation efforts benefit biodiversity and local ecotourism economies while spotlighting cross border wildlife migration patterns. Whooping cranes migrate between Canada and the US. Ski areas in the Pacific Northwest are celebrating incoming snowfall after a difficult season start as the series of storm systems bring colder weather and snow to parts of the US West. Heavy rain flood, heavy rain, flooding risk and storm systems are expected to disrupt travel in the western US this Christmas week, while the south and central US may see unreasonably warm conditions. Weather patterns have direct effects on transportation, emergency response resources, and seasonal economic activity, travel, hospitality, winter sports. The United States and Mexico signed a new agreement to tackle the long standing Tijuana River sewage crisis, which has caused pollution issues on both sides of the border. The deal involves giant infrastructure upgrades and enhanced water monitoring to protect marine and coastal environments near San Diego and Tijuana. Cross border environmental issues require cooperation. Successful implementation improves public health and tourism appeal and sets a precedent for tackling shared natural resource concerns. Here are the additional developments shaping North America affairs. In December 17 to December 20, storm complex brought high winds and snow across US and Canada, disrupting travel and power services. CDC data shows numerous measles outbreaks across states in 2025, highlighting public health vigilance. Commentary from Canada media discusses whether Canada should pursue different trade strategies amid pressure on USMCA. A serious crime event involving a shooting at an American university has drawn attention to campus safety concerns. The European Union has postponed the long anticipated free trade agreement with Mercosur, the South American trade bloc that includes Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia, after strong political opposition and protest from European farmers concerned about standards and protections. Leaders now aim to revisit the deal. Leaders now aim to revisit the deal in early 2026 to resolve dispute and seek member state support. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva expressed strong frustration, calling the agreement crucial and multilateral trade, crucial for multilateral trade. This deal was expected to create one of the largest free trade zones in the world, boosting commerce across continents and strengthening South America's global economic position. Its delay affects export markets, investment flows, and diplomatic ties with Europe. Tensions between United States and Venezuela continue to dominate South American geopolitics. Recent US policy has intensified military and political pressure on Caracas, shifting focus on drug and migration issues to challenging President Nicolas Maduro's regime directly. The US has expanded military pressure in the Caribbean, and analysts warn that options for Washington are narrowing amid political and legislative debate back home. This standoff has significant implications for regional stability, oil exports, and geopolitical alignments in the Americas, with debates ranging over whether US sanctions amount to strategic policy or political maneuvering or political maneuvering. Following recent US military actions and naval strategy shifts, a blockade on sanctioned oil tankers going in and out of Venezuela was sanctioned, escalating economic pressures on oil dependent state. The blockade targets Venezuelan oil exports and has sparked controversy over legality under international law. Caracas condemns the move and plans to elevate the issue to the United Nations. Venezuela's economy is heavily reliant on oil, and the blockade could further strain an already fragile system. The international response could shape diplomatic dynamics across South America and beyond. South America's economy in 2025 is characterized by moderate growth with structural challenges such as financing gaps, inflation pressures, and reliance on commodity exports. Many countries are exploring diversified trade partnership, balancing major powers like the US, China, and the European Union to attract investment and boost manufacturing capacities. China recently published a policy paper on Latin America and the Caribbean, emphasizing its growing interest and offering expanded cooperation amid US strategic pressure, a sign of shifting geopolitical context in the region. Economic projections from regional bodies show South America's GDP growth around 2.4 to 2.9% in 2025, driven by trade with China, commodity demand, and diversified export strategies, though growth rates remain moderate compared to past decades. Internal political developments like security policy reforms, elections, and debates over foreign influence continue to influence South America's strategic direction. For example, some legislative actions in Brazil aimed at combating criminal groups reflect ongoing stability concerns. European governments have approved 90 billion euros loan facility for Ukraine to support defense and rebuilding efforts amid the ongoing war with Russia. This deal came after plans to use frozen Russian assets were rejected due to legal concerns. The loan backed by the European Union budget aims to sustain Kiev's finances through 2026 and 2027. This is one of the biggest financial commitments Europe has made toward Kiev since the war began, reflecting growing determination to counter Russian aggression, but also raising debates about burden sharing and fiscal impact across European Union states. 10 Schengen area countries have agreed to maintain internal border inspections until mid 2026, disrupting Europe's long held passport free travel tradition. Security concerns, including terrorism and irregular migrations, are cited as primary reasons. The Schengen zone has been a cornerstone of European integration. Extended border check affect tourism, cross-border commuting, and trade, highlighting ongoing challenges between freedom and security. Sweden and Germany are cutting portions of their international aid budgets to pour more funding into Ukraine and defense spending. Aid to health will be reduced as a result. Critics warn this might weaken global humanitarian efforts. Europe is increasingly prioritizing regional security and defense over traditional overseas development assistance, signaling a strategic shift in foreign policy priorities. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has campaigned to make Berlin a central geopolitical hub in Europe, advocating increased defense spending and greater European autonomy in security affairs. He has also sought control over frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine but face resistance from some European Union partners. Germany's emerging strategic vision reflects broader debates on Europe's role in global security, balancing autonomy, alliance with the US, and internal political divides. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer urged the US President Donald Trump to work towards a just peace settlement for Ukraine during ongoing negotiations in Miami involving US, European, Ukrainian, and Russian representatives. European delegates are pushing for an outcome that preserves Ukrainian sovereignty and security. The UK, though outside the US, the UK, though outside the European Union, remains deeply engaged in European security diplomacy, highlighting transatlantic efforts to shape the post war future of Eastern Europe. In positive cultural and educational news, the UK has announced it will rejoin the Erasmus Student Exchange Program in 2027, strengthening the academic and cultural exchange across Europe after years of absence post Brexit. Rejoining Erasmus Plus enhances opportunities for students, educators, and cultural cooperation, signaling a gradual softening of some Brexit era divides in European collaboration. Latest reporting shows that Ukraine, the US, and European partners held constructive and productive talks aiming to align strategies for peace and post war stability. European involvement remains central even as peace remains elusive. Europe's active role in diplomacy underscores its direct stake in regional stability, economic security, and defense cooperation in the face of prolonged conflict. Commentators note that Europe must define strategic purpose matched with decisive collective action, balancing defense, economic priorities, and internal cohesion amid external pressures from Russia, China, and shifting US policy. The fragile ceasefire in Gaza Strip appears to be holding, but major diplomatic challenges remain. Peace negotiations, including the US Phase 2 plan, face hurdles around core issues such as Gaza governance, disarmament of Hamas, and Israel's security concerns. Critics say unresolved political differences could destabilize the truce, even as many governments push for a broader peace framework. This conflict has global diplomatic implications, influencing foreign relations between US, Arab states, and partners in Europe and beyond. Iraq's November 2025 paramilitary elections have left the country without a clear governing majority. Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al Sudani's party won the most seats but lacks enough support to rule alone. Major political blocs, from Iran aligned factions to Kurdish parties, are negotiating coalitions. Analysts warn that power struggles and militia politics could complicate governance and security in Iraq. Iraq's stability is crucial for regional oil markets, security cooperation, and Iran US influence dynamics in West Asia. Israel is preparing to urge the United States for renewed military action against Iran, citing concerns over Tehran's missile development and nuclear enrichment. With diplomatic engagements ahead, Israeli officials emphasize Iran's growing ballistic capabilities and regional proxy influence. Iran, for its part, claims to have rebuilt key infrastructure and continues advancing military programs. US and Israel coordination on Iran signals an intensifying geopolitical contest in the region, affecting global security, oil markets, and alliances. Recent analysis show that Middle East power balance is reshaping after years of conflict, with countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia asserting influence and normalization efforts between Arab states and Israel evolving at various paces. Internal dynamics in Syria and Lebanon remain key in the strategic shift. Iran has signaled openness to dialogue in nuclear talks while pushing back against external pressures, a stance likely to impact negotiations with the US and Gulf states moving into 2026. Saudi backed forces have amassed near Yemen's eastern border amid advances by the Southern Transitional Council, raising concerns of direct conflict between Saudi and UAE aligned factions. The UN has called for restraint. Iran's economy remains fragile after 2025 conflict with Israel, with oil exports drastically reduced and infrastructure damage, imposing heavy financial strain. 9 people were killed and at least 10 were injured in a mass shooting in a licensed tavern in Bakkersdijk, Johannesburg, South Africa. Authorities say multiple armed gunmen opened fire on patrons late on December 21 and then fled the scene. Police have launched a manhunt for suspects and the motive is under investigation. Crime and gun violence remain serious concerns in parts of South Africa, especially in economically strained townships. Incidents like this affect public safety policy, community trust in law enforcement, and regional tourism confidence. At the Russia Africa Partnership Forum in Cairo, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el Sisi called for reform on the United Nations Security Council to give greater representation to African nations. He argued that Africa's demographic weight, political importance, and economic potential justify a stronger role in global decision making. Russia's foreign minister backed coordinated efforts to advance African interests and future cooperation plans. United Nations Security Council reform has been a priority for African Union, influencing peace, conflict resolution, and resource governance on the continent. Popular American streamer IShowSpeed announced an ambitious Speed Does Africa tour, planning a month-long live stream across 20 African countries. The creative project aims to showcase diverse cultures, landscapes, and local stories in real time, a milestone in travel, digital content, and cross continental media exposure. This highlights Africa's growing role in global digital media and the potential for tourism, cultural engagement, and creative economies. The 2025 Africa Cup of Nations has kicked off in Morocco, featuring 24 national teams competing from December 21, 2025 to 9 to 18 January 2026. This edition marks a major moment for African football and continental unity. AFCON is one of the continent's biggest sporting events, driving tourism, pan African pride, and global sporting attention. The African Development Bank raised $11 billion for low cost development lending to low income countries, major boost for infrastructure, roads, irrigation, and power projects across Africa. The siege of Bamako by an Al Qaeda linked coalition in Mali signals a dangerous shift towards urban terrorism, potentially destabilizing the Sahel region and requiring urgent regional security responses. The US signed multi year health agreements with Nigeria, Cameroon, and Mozambique, focusing on HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and maternal and child health support, a significant health diplomacy move. Ethiopia is planning Africa's biggest airport near Addis Ababa, a transformative project for continental connectivity and global travel infrastructure. Foreign ministers from Asian countries met in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to try to stop deadly clashes between Thailand and Cambodia along their shared border. The renewed conflict began in December and has involved artillery and air operations forcing tens of thousands to flee their homes. Asian leaders are working to revive ceasefire commitments and support diplomatic solutions even as US and Chinese diplomacy continues behind the scenes. This is one of the Southeast Asia's most serious and territorial disputes in years, with potential regional security and refugee ramifications if fighting continues without resolution. The major tourism cooperation development. Japan and South Korea have joined Taiwan, Thailand, Singapore, and Malaysia in policies promoting visa free travel to China, along with joint promotional events. This effort has already led to stronger travel flows and broader cultural engagements across East and Southeast Asia. This reflects strategic regional collaboration to stimulate economic growth through tourism and people-to-people ties, even amid geopolitical competition in Asia Pacific. Asian stock markets traded higher as investors stayed optimistic near year-end following strong global tech performance and expectations of economic stability. The Japanese yen weakened against major currencies despite the Bank of Japan recent rate increase, boosting exporters' prospects. South Korean markets also rose, especially in tech sectors. Financial markets across Asia are sensitive to global economic cues such as US data dollar strength and China's policy direction, making these moves important indicators of investor sentiment. An international cooperation effort called the Global Partnership Against Online Scams was launched in Bangkok, Thailand, bringing together over 60 countries, including governments, enforcement, and tech platforms like Meta and TikTok to fight rising digital fraud and cybercrime that cost billions worldwide. Cybersecurity and online crimes are increasingly global challenges. This partnership highlights Asia's leadership efforts in cross-border cooperation and especially important as digital economies expand. Myanmar's 2025-26 general election is scheduled to start on December 28, 2025, marking a controversial milestone since the 2021 military coup. The election is expected to span several phases, concluding January 2026, and will be closely watched globally, and concerns about legitimacy and democratic process. How Myanmar's political transition unfolds will impact humanitarian conditions, regional diplomacy, and Asians' effort to engage with junta and opposition forces. Massive flooding and landslides triggered by cyclone and typhoons across Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines, part of a widespread natural disaster season, have had long lasting effects on millions of people, infrastructure, and regional economies. Climate related disasters are shaping policy priorities, disaster response coordination, and international and strategic and, and international aid strategies throughout Asia. Recent economic assessments show that Asian economic growth has been sluggish in 2025, allowing room for interest rate cuts in some countries, while trade tensions and broader global barriers continue to challenge recovery. These macroeconomic signals help analysts forecast inflation patterns, export demand, and central bank strategies for 2026 across Asia. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has initiated a major federal review of intelligence and policy practices following the deadly Bondi Beach terrorist attack. The 4 month inquiry will assess whether current national security systems, information sharing, and law enforcement structures are adequate to protect public safety, It responds to public and political pressure, including calls for a full Commonwealth Royal Commission into the incident and rising concerns about radicalization and domestic security. This review could lead a major reform in national security law, intelligence coordination, and counter-terrorism policy in Australia, with potential implications for civil liberties and future safeguards. Recent data shows New Zealand's consumer confidence index climbed to 100.5 101.5 in December 2025, its highest level in over 4 years. The increase suggests growing optimism amongst households, supported by stable interest rate communications from the central bank and rising discretionary spending, particularly among mortgage holders. Consumer confidence is a key economic indicator. This rise may signal strengthening domestic demand and more resilient economy heading into 2026. The Australian government lifted its inflation forecast to 3.75% for the fiscal year ending June 2026 amid price increases in services and housing. Despite this, officials kept their spending plans intact, leading to a revised budget deficit and projections of moderate economic growth. Analysts now see political interest rate hikes in early 2026 in response to evolving Analysts now seek potential interest rate hikes in early 2026 in response to evolving inflationary pressures. Inflation forecasts and budget decisions shape monetary policy and household costs and business confidence, all key for economic stability. Air New Zealand announced new seasonal flights between Brisbane and Queenstown starting mid 2026, alongside increased services from Brisbane to Auckland, Christchurch, and Wellington during weak winter travel. This expansion reflects growing demand for trans-Tasman travel and increased airline competition. A new think tank report urges India and New Zealand to double bilateral trade over the next 5 years through import tariff reductions, better connectivity, and broader sector cooperation. The recommendations align with ongoing talks towards a comprehensive free trade agreement, highlighting mutual interest in deeper economic ties. Stronger trade partnership can support export growth, job creation, and diversified economic links across Indo-Pacific region. Australia's party has formally called for a Commonwealth Royal Commission into the Bondi Beach terror attack and broader anti-Semitism issues, pushing for comprehensive investigation and accountability mechanisms. Debates over how to respond to terrorism and social divisions are shaping public policy and community trust in governance. India has suspended visa operations at its India Visa Application Center in Chittagong, Bangladesh, citing security concerns after protests near Assistant High Commission. The Indian Ministry of External Affairs said the move was taken to protect staff and premises in view of rising tensions and demonstrations following violence in Bangladesh. India also rejected media reports claiming a security breach at its Bangladesh High Commission in New Delhi, calling such claims misleading propaganda. This reflects the diplomatic sensitivity between India and Bangladesh, especially after recent unrest, and shows India's prioritizing its diplomatic security and narrative. India has signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Oman, expanding its Middle East economic ties. Under the deal, India ex- India exports will receive zero duty access to over 98% of Omani tariff lines. While India will reduce tariffs on a majority of imports, the pact aims to boost trade in sectors like gems, textiles, and pharmaceuticals and counter the impact of rising US tariffs, strengthening economic and strategic ties with Oman, located near Strait of Hormuz, a vital global oil route, enhances India's role in regional trade and supply chains. Union Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia announced that India has officially become the fourth largest economy in the world with a GDP of around $4.5 trillion and the YEF Bharat Summit 2025 in Indore. He projected that India could overtake Germany to become the third largest economy by 2027. Scindia also highlighted India's booming startup ecosystem with over 2 lakh startups and 122 unicorns. This milestone highlights India's growing economic influence globally and supports its diplomatic and strategic weight on the world stage. The Reserve Bank of India carried out firm intervention in forex markets to stabilize the Indian rupee after recent depreciation against the US dollar. RBI's actions helped strengthen the currency above the 90 mark before settling near 89.27 rupees. Analysts say the rupee's analysts say the rupee's future will depend on foreign capital inflows and global economic conditions. Currency stability is crucial for inflation control, investment confidence, and India's integration with global finance market. India and the Netherlands signed a memorandum of understanding to collaborate on the National Maritime Heritage Complex at Lothal. The partnership includes cooperation with the National Maritime Museum in Amsterdam on planning, designing, and curatorial expertise for the heritage site in Gujarat. The cultural diplomatic initiative deepens historic ties and promotes heritage tourism and international cultural exchange. China has filed a formal complaint at the World Trade Organization challenging India's tariffs on information and communication technology products and subsidies for solar energy industries. Beijing alleges that India's measures give India a firm unfair advantage and hurt Chinese exporters. This highlights trade tensions between India and China, the world's two most populous economies, and could affect global supply chains and diplomatic relations. India's foreign policy continues to expand ambitiously with strategic ties across Middle East, Europe, and trade blocs. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar recently emphasized that India's foreign policy must be ambitious and horizon expanding to strengthen its global role. Regional politics such as Bangladesh unrest and Indian diplomatic stance influence South Asian stability and India's international image. That's our news for the international affairs. It was